Tourette's Podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as...
Parents were calling the school saying, like, is my kid next? You know, like, it was a pretty big deal. The other parent, again, it was like, wow, this could have happened to anybody. Was there something in the water? Is he contagious?
This is Tourette's Podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Hey everybody, it's Ben. So I'm about to do some traveling. Got some work to do with the Tourette Association, which I'm quite excited about. This is all in preparation for the October 29th event that I so hope you're going to join me for. The 2020 Virtual Gala, again, October 29th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Oh, my cat just joined me. Listen to how loud this guy purrs. Hold on. Okay, back to it. The 2020 Virtual Gala, October 29th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, tourette.org/gala. You can fire up your computer and hang out as I MC a really great program that'll be fun to check out, but also a vital opportunity for lending your support to the Tourette Association of America, keeping them fueled so they can continue delivering information and services that help you and so many others live a good life with TS. Your support does matter and is frankly more meaningful when the support comes from the community. I think anyway, as a gift to the people in the future who may find themselves in need of facts and resources and confidence. As far as I know, the association isn't selling alpacas or anything like that. They need your help. So come along, October 29th. Tickets should be on sale by the time you hear this. Tourette.org/gala. This is a different and fun episode. Michael, our guest this week, and he's a podcaster, by the way. He's got a show called Jollyville Radio. Michael is a pretty unusual story, which we build up to. The first part of the conversation is really just talking, hanging out, and learning about the work he does. Matter of fact, a job he has that's actually perfect for someone with Tourette and may give you some ideas if you're at the age where you're trying to figure out maybe what you're here for, what you might be good at in a career sense, if you haven't pinned that down yet. And then we get to his pretty dramatic and kind of suspenseful story of getting diagnosed with TS. Michael can clearly remember his first tick, because it busted onto the scene, like the 17-year-old cicadas, right after a lunch that he will never forget. He even remembers the date. So this is another one that just gets better and better as we go and dig deeper, despite the fact that I was a little under the weather as we recorded this, and I'm still dealing with this voice issue, as you can hear, but that doesn't matter. Please enjoy a different kind of story here. Here's Michael.
My name is Michael Crosa. I'm originally from Asheville, North Carolina, but I currently live in Austin, Texas. I've been here a little over 2 years. Professionally, for work, I work in higher education. I'm a crisis case manager for students. It's not quite counseling, but more along the lines of connecting students to resources when they are hitting a crisis. Occasionally it involves behavioral intervention, but generally speaking, it's a lot of just sitting with people going through really tough times and trying to figure out what they need to help keep them successful at school. And that's at University of Texas at Austin. Wow. So that's professionally. On the side, for fun, I have a podcast called Jollyville Radio. And it's sort of a reaction to, number one, just my professional work being so heavy. And then secondly, quarantine and everyone being in isolation, and in my opinion, feels like we need something that, or you know what, I'm going to use I statements. I need something that connects me to my friends, something that reminds me of the beautiful things happening in the world, reminds me that there's community building still happening out there. Because I mean, even beyond quarantine, there's a lot going on to be sad, frustrated, upset about. So Jollyville Radio it's a fiction podcast, kind of like if you're familiar with Prairie Home Companion.
Yeah.
It also might have some Welcome to Night Vale vibes, only more on the happy side, or even like Portlandia. It's very sketch comedy based, and it's kind of coming from this fictional town of Jollyville. There actually is a part of Austin called Jollyville. That is a real name. I didn't make that up, but we fictionalize it for our podcast.
That's awesome. So, and you mentioned Asheville. Did you grow up there? Like, go to school there?
Yes. So I grew up I grew up there as a kid. I left for college and grad school, and then came back there as an adult, and lived there for about 4 years before moving back to Texas.
That's cool. Yeah, I have a sister out there, and
cool.
I always love visiting Asheville. I mean, it's beautiful no matter what time of year you go, but
Definitely,
just the culture is really cool out there. I mean, obviously, you could roll a rock and you hit a brewery. I mean, it's which I think is maybe its title. I think it's been kind of neck and neck with maybe Portland or one of these other beer loving cities. It's I think per capita has the most breweries. Yeah, Beer City USA is kind of its badge. And so doing the crisis communication stuff, I mean, that's interesting too.
Yeah.
When you're helping people find resources that they need, I mean, obviously you're doing a lot of listening and a lot of conversation to try to get the context and try to figure out where they need to be. How often do you find, though, just the process of doing that is helpful, just in terms of listening and lending your ear where you understand where they're coming from?
Totally.
That just kind of, it does so much of the work. I'm not saying that's the answer to everything, that there are real resources people need, but just having that conversation and just kind of listening and saying something that's affirming. It's so powerful.
I think, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think there are plenty of cases where whatever somebody's crisis or situation was, is that, or the answer, let's say, to whatever their crisis was, isn't necessarily any physical thing, or like, oh, you need this phone number. It's none of that. Right. It's just, you just needed to say it out loud.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of times where, somebody, they know the answer, or whatever, they know what needs to be done. They need, they just need somebody that believes in them, or somebody that can just say like, wow, that sounds really hard, or something like that. And you're absolutely right. Just being there to help people is, or just to be there to hear them is a big part of what we do.
Well, it's such a contrast too from what a lot of people are accustomed to hearing, which is like, oh, just toughen up, or and people do say that to this day.
Totally.
Just like, oh, well, you just need to, you just need this, or you just need that. And the word just is always in front of it. And it just kind of cheapens the experience of,
or at least
having actual trauma in your life that you need to sort through. And, it certainly doesn't help by saying, you just need to toughen up, or you just need to take a walk, or, or whatever it is. And
or at least it wasn't worse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, think about how lucky you actually are, that sort of thing. And,
right.
We all have our own context and our own, kind of framework. And I would say, obviously, I do have, by some measures, a more fortunate life than other people on this globe. But it doesn't mean that I also, like, within that framework, feel, some sort of pain that is very measurable.
Absolutely.
And I have gone to some resources in the past that, might have been, I think, viewed as like a weakness, or some kind of acknowledgement of weakness. Or I talked at the beginning of season 5 about checking myself into an inpatient hospital just to spend some time working on myself. And it was difficult. I didn't know what the expectations would be. Didn't know how I would stand it. Would the staff be kind of ignorant to what I'm going through? Is it just a job for them, or are they, kind of meeting me in the middle, or what are the other people like they're going to be like? And but it was the most rewarding experience I've maybe ever had. And
that's
really, awesome. Just the meaningful changes that happened in my life after that were great, but it definitely took me, I think, just kind of stepping away from what I would do to myself, which I would have that inner voice to say, like, maybe I do need to toughen up because other people have it worse. I mean, you can fake yourself out by doing that.
Totally.
And it is really important to have somebody else say, like, no. There are actual resources. These exist for a reason. Your case fits perfectly with this other thing. Let me try to connect you with something that might be helpful to you.
Yeah. You know, on the figurative side, like, you are worthy of this help. And then on the more practical side, like, you are eligible for this help. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's funny you talk about kind of like the idea of comparing or whatever. I have a good friend who likes to say that you could be drowning in the shallow end of the pool and I could be drowning in the deep end of the pool,
Mm-hmm.
but we're both drowning.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. So what good does it do to try to say how deep the pool is? Doesn't matter. Both people are drowning.
Right. Right. Well, what, I guess, was your interest point in doing that kind of work? What was it? Your own experiences with Tourette, or the other things that kind of orbit it, or how'd you get involved with that kind of work?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, especially bringing it around to like Tourette syndrome. I think that Tourette's doesn't not play a role, but I think I've, in a sense, always kind of been drawn to where people need the most help, and I think I have a certain kind of emotional capacity or maybe compulsion to be in those spaces and help people out there. And I have this very specific memory of in grad school. So my graduate degree is in higher education administration and specifically as it comes to student life. So I'm not like a trained counselor or anything like that, but but again, yeah, student life specialist basically. And so I have this memory of one of the first days of training, hearing from somebody who basically did this kind of work. And she was giving some examples about how like she, met with these students after their apartment burned down, like the day of, and like helped them find where they needed to stay for the night. And one time she had to tell a football player that his grandmother who raised him died, and he broke down in her arms right there. She, here she was holding this giant football player who's crying like a baby, and like those kind of things that like everyone else in the room, I think, was having this thought of like, oh my gosh, that sounds terrible. And I was like, sign me up. That's what I want to do. Obviously not making people cry, or anything, but just being the one who's there and being capable of having these difficult conversations and stuff like that just spoke volumes to me. And so as I kind of went through my higher ed career, which was relatively short to this point, but I just had it in mind that that's what I want to do. I want to help people, or I want to help college students who are having these crises and be with them during that. And I did some other jobs within the higher ed field. And that's when I mentioned I moved to Texas as I saw the dream job post at UT Austin. It was at 100% what I was looking for. I had just the exact resume experience that they were asking for. And so here I am.
That's cool that, what you felt sort of emotionally and personally drawn to is something that somebody else is exactly looking for. And, there's a demand they're willing to pay that's created not just out of the blue, that's created in recognition of, like we have this thing in our front yard, this need that needs to be filled. Yeah. And just your sort of personal interest and, obviously, like life experience shapes everything, but sure. But you being drawn to this kind of thing in such a specific way, it's so cool how that stuff comes together. It really speaks to, I think, also just kind of following what your interests are. There's going to be somebody else out there in the world who's going to identify with it. There isn't immediately a recognition that, and this maybe goes back to me kind of maybe faking myself out. I've been through plenty of treatments and things like that in the past, but getting there to the hospital and seeing the other people, and we'd have these group sessions where we would talk about, kind of where we were, why we were there, and what we're feeling and all that. And there were people with stories that were really heavy and much more so than mine, but we all kind of got the same thing out of it. And it was me not really realizing or recognizing that that's something that could really be beneficial to me, because I just thought I didn't measure up, or I didn't feel like I met the description of somebody who should be there, even though, in private I was completely suffering. But the more you see something like that, and the more you hear conversations like this, it's like the more you realize this is for everybody. The context is context and privilege is privilege, but this is really for everybody to understand that we're maybe more vulnerable, or we can allow ourselves to be openly more vulnerable than we actually are. That was the wrong way to say it. More vulnerable than maybe we appraise ourselves to be initially. Yeah. And it just invites people to, I think, in a way, just kind of chill out about each other and give each other a break and give each other more room to breathe. And it's just, I'm really encouraged by conversations like this and jobs being created increasingly, especially in academic environments for for crisis communications and just being there for people who are going through transitions so they don't have to go through it quietly. And then, all the things that suffer in result of that, classwork, hygiene, nutrition, all of this. And
totally.
There's a lot of stuff out there. And especially this year, like you were saying, 2020 is its own beast.
Yeah,
and,
holy smokes.
how has 2020 changed for you in terms of your work?
Oof. Well, one thing that I want to jump back to what you were talking about before we go on there was this one of the phrases that people say sometimes that kind of like breaks my brain a little bit is that, like, let's say in the context of let's go there, like suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
If somebody's saying like that they're struggling with this, and then somebody else says in response like, oh, they're just doing it for the attention.
Right. Yeah.
Like, maybe they should get the attention.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, okay, then let's, you know what I mean? If somebody's struggling that hard, absolutely, they deserve whatever attention that, not frivolously, like, it's real. That's real. Somebody needs some either help or, whatever. Anyway.
No, that's true. It's really interesting how language is for us and sort of phrases that we kind of like couch ourselves in. You could say the same thing as like, yeah, I totally agree. What do you mean by that? Because I'll tell you what I mean by that.
Yeah.
Perspective is so, again, why I like having these conversations, because I think every time I have a conversation for the podcast, there's something brand new I take from it, or just kind of like a new color to add to something that I'm still trying to understand, or something that I've known in my life, but don't know it through your eyes.
Yeah.
I think you know what I'm trying to say. It's just,
yeah, totally on the same page of like, well, what's so bad about that?
yeah.
At least in that example. But anyway, you had asked about how 2020 changed the work, and to the other point that kind of perfectly ties into is you were talking about how jobs are being created and all of this kind of stuff. And my department, or not technically, it's a unit within a department, but whatever. It's called, my office is called Student Emergency Services.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of these offices, I don't remember exactly how old it is, somewhere in the 10 to 15 I think year mark, somewhere in there. But like, it's one of those things that, like, it took a while to get advocacy for the one person, for that to be a one person job, and then it was pretty clear that it needed to be a 2-person job.
Mm-hmm.
And then they added people, and then they, you know what I mean? And just like, once it was like, oh, this is super useful.
Yeah.
Just in the 2 years when I started there were 6 of us in the office. And in the time, like in the past 2 years, it's been almost exactly 2 years since I've been working there, at least at the time of this interview, we're up to 16 people. That's from 6 to 16. Wow. And a lot of that is specifically because of COVID. And we added in the last month or two, we've added 5 different positions specifically with the job of being the experts on all of the non-medical support that comes with COVID, of like, I think my roommate has it and I don't know what to do, or I tested positive and I don't have a place to isolate, or I can't go to class and my professor is being a jerk about it, or whatever the case is. We've got all of these positions specifically for that, and it has been busy. Gosh.
Yeah.
It's been definitely busy. And I'm glad those staff members they're wonderful people, and they have been able to really jump in and join the work quickly. And we needed that just because there was so much need for some kind of support.
Yeah. Yeah. And, like telemedicine and telehealth was something that pre-existed 2020, but I mean, I imagine you're doing that, in a pretty prolific way lately.
Totally.
Is that, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're separate from the actual, University Health Services office, but absolutely. And I mean, I think I've heard that even from non-university people of like, yeah, I went to see my doctor about this random thing and it had to be, has to be telehealth. That's the only option.
Mm-hmm. Is it different? Because I see a therapist. Actually, I see 2 of them. And this year, nothing's been in person. It's all been over the laptop. I'm used to it. That's that's just kind of the standard. That's the world we live in. But is it different for you in terms of making that connection, or does it? I know it's case by case and everybody's different, but Just contextually, does that feel different to you in terms of making that connection and feeling like you can really kind of get the gist of where they're coming from?
It's interesting that you bring that up, man. So starting out, at least for me, there's been, or in my work, there's been a couple phases of the specifically the way that coronavirus has impacted students. So when it first hit, it wasn't so like in March, April, May, June, like all that stuff. It wasn't so much that people were getting COVID and were, all that kind of stuff. It was more that everyone lost their job. And
Yeah.
so
Hmm.
and everyone suddenly has to figure out how to attend university online instead of, um, in person. Maybe they were relying on the computer lab or, whatever. So during
Hmm.
that period, it was mostly a financial crisis. Then now that, we've kind of started, and then during the summer, it was a mix of things. And now that we've started classes again for the fall, it's a bit of a mix. There's still the financial stuff, but now there really are people, a lot of students who are, either getting it or symptoms, or like we talked about, like are worried about their roommates, or it's all over the place.
Hmm.
So I at the beginning, I was doing a lot of Zoom calls with students, but I also think that what I'm seeing is that students are just tired of Zoom,
Yeah.
and all their
Yeah.
classes are on Zoom, and all, everything's on Zoom, and a phone call is just so much easier.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And at least for my purposes, I mean, it definitely helps to be able to see somebody's facial stuff, but a lot of what I'm doing is also just kind of information based, procedural. There is some of the listening, but there's also just the like talking through the technicalities and everything like that. And I found people are way more willing to, or way more interested in phone calls too than they were before all this too.
I could see it going either way just because, we're in the comfort of our own homes and our own environments.
Yeah.
Obviously, like we're not necessarily dressing up for, being out in public. And, when I jump on Zoom meetings with my colleagues, I'm just, it's like t-shirt and jeans, where when I'm in the office, it's suit and tie. And I could, it's kind of funny, I guess, with these sort of online video chat
Mm.
companies, 2020 has been kind of a blessing and a curse because obviously the usage of these tools through the roof. But at the same time,
Yeah.
I feel like everybody's sick of them, and we're trying to look for like new solutions to connect. And everybody, there's a theme that comes with. I feel like 80% of the Zoom meetings I've been on of like, oh man, it'll be nice when we can all see each other in person
Right. Back to
again.
the
But
yeah, back to
anyway,
whatever.
back to the Zoom meeting, and
I'll admit, I'm one of the people, I don't mind, man. Zoom
yeah,
doesn't bother me. I am perfectly happy to have a Zoom meeting, and I hope that it continue, certain elements of it normalize. Especially,
I'm with you.
yeah, there are
Yeah,
parts of
I'm
it that
I'm totally with you.
before quarantine, like I remember there being part of some committee in the university, and it was one of these things where it's made as, I think it was an awards committee, so it's made up of one person from a lot of different offices. Nobody knows each other. We had to go. We found a meeting room. It's all the way across campus. It's Texas. I'm hot. I'm wearing business casual, sweating. You know. And nowadays it's like no, like even I'm sure that even after coronavirus, nobody would even consider it. No, let's just do a video conference, and that's it. Everybody just stays in your office. We do whatever
Hmm.
we were going to do, and then go back.
Yeah, we've learned a lot about our capacity for substitutes this year, and
Yeah.
finding efficiencies, and where I think kind of maybe the classic human resources approaches are like, oh no, working from home, that doesn't work, and
Yeah.
then getting into a year where we don't have any choice. A lot of companies have made the move. We're like, yeah, we're just going to do this permanently now. Like
Yeah.
Microsoft, I think just recently, we're like, yeah, we're going to let a good amount of employees just work from home. We can do
Right.
this, and
Yeah, I think yeah, you're right. I think there's been a lot.
so, what's your history with Tourette? I mean, I'm glad we spent time talking about the about
Oh,
this
yeah,
stuff
yeah,
because
yeah.
it's totally on everybody's minds of just such a weird dynamic being in 2020, having the lack of just kind of in person connectivity in a lot of cases anyway, not all,
Yeah.
but with Tourette, is this something that I guess something that's kind of followed you from youth? Did you get an early diagnosis, or what's the story with that?
Yeah. No. So I had a pretty rare experience with it. That I got it not even overnight, it was over lunch. So, and it was pretty late. So I was 16. It was March 16th, 2007. Very memorable day in my life. And I
Mm.
remember there's a couple, like that probably had some kind of a brain something, whether that was through illness, which I think is a likely one, or some other kind of brain trauma, but something that triggered it. And I specifically remember, as in pre-calculus class, I came back, sat down in my seat after lunch, and all of a sudden, like, my arm shot out to the side. I remember having
Mm.
this thought of, like, did I do that? And then as I'm sitting there, then all of a sudden my nose starts doing like the bunny rabbit thing, and I was like, I don't think I'm doing that.
Hmm.
And just the rest of class of just like kind of like white knuckling there at my desk of like, oh no, what's going to happen next? That's when it first started.
Wow.
One of the other things that was very different about my experience is that a lot of kids go through some elements of like bullying or that kind of thing, and that really didn't happen, because at least for me, because at least in high school, because high school and college were different, but in high school, I had already established my friend groups, like like all of that was already established. And then when it happened, I remember there being this kind of feeling of this could have happened to anybody.
Yeah.
It was just such a random and bizarre thing.
Yeah. Wow. That's see. I guess one real interesting thing to me about that is, like a lot of the classic Tourette syndrome literature is, it's a childhood onset disorder, and like most of the diagnoses happen, in the first handful of years,
Yeah.
age 5 to age 12 or whatever, um, and when you're that young, it's kind of a natural part of your development. I don't remember the first time I ticked. It's just kind of, in my
Right.
mind, it's always been there with me.
Right.
So being in your adult life, and you are aware of your standards, yourself, and if you do something that's completely like, wait a minute, what was that?
Yeah.
And it came from you. It's part of you.
Right.
And I mean that had to be definitely something I've never felt as a Touretteer. Like, I'll have new tics that come up,
Sure. Sure.
but I identify them as like, okay, that's a new tic. It's
Yeah,
not a
that's what
surprise
that
to me.
was.
But how? I mean, how did that feel in that moment of being basically a fully formed human, and then you got this brand new thing, and we're like, what, where did that come from?
It
What is
was,
this? I
yeah,
mean,
it was so bizarre. And I remember feeling like being aware of it, for one. It didn't hurt, you know? So I
yeah,
wasn't like worried about it in that sense, I think, at the time. Other than just like not really having any idea what was going on. And my kind of the longer story of that particular day is that my mom happened to be a teacher at the very school that I was at. I was going to high school, and so I kind of wrote it out throughout that class. And then the last class of the day was music theory, which I was my favorite class by far. But anyway, point is, I went up to the teacher and I was like, "Hey, man, there's this weird thing happening, so like," and we had a test that day. So it's like, so if I don't really know what's up, but I just want you to know something's up. And he was like, okay,
yeah.
whatever. And so I'm taking the test, and I think I remember anyway that like my back was kind of jerking and doing all this stuff. And as a 16-year-old, I don't think I didn't know that like neurological stuff is like scary.
Hmm.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I think my teacher recognized like, there's something neurological happening. And so he straight up, he drove me. It wasn't that big of a high school, but he still drove me from the band room down to my mom's classroom.
Wow.
And I remember going into my mom's, it was her planning period. And so she was like working on some emails. She was surprised to see me, but I said, "Hey, Mom, I think we got to go to the doctor or something." She's like, "Oh, okay, well, let me finish up what I'm doing." And I sat down at a desk, waiting for it to be done. And my foot started tapping kind of loudly on the floor. And she said, "Hey, I need to concentrate. Do you mind stopping that?" And I said, "No, that's what I'm saying." She's like, "That's what's wrong?" And I said, "Yeah." She's like, "Okay, we're going to the ER right now." So, um, we so like that was kind of the first thing. And what's weird, well, the other thing that's weird about my presentation is that it was physical tics first, and they were pretty severe. After that first day they kind of grew. And I mean, I would like, some of the things I remember is like my arms would be going doing wacky things for like a whole minute or two at a time. And I remember shaking my head back and forth so hard that, occasionally my glasses fell off and I would see spots or like that kind of stuff. And it took us about 5 months between when those tics started and until we got like a satisfactory answer. The hospitals tended to give kind of some very flamboyant diagnosis to it, and like one of them was myoclonus, which we went home. Do you know that one?
Yeah, and from the surface level, but
yeah. So that's what the doctor. It is myoclonus, and then my parents and we went home and looked it up on Wikipedia. I was like, I don't think that's what this is, and did a couple other tests and did a little bit more research, and was like, no, this ain't it. And then same thing. I think there was a doctor in Atlanta that diagnosed me with conversion disorder, which is basically like kind of PTSD that manifests in the body physically. But it was like, well, what was the trauma? There was just stuff like that like didn't really make sense. And then,
right.
I finally, and by the way, this whole time still is all physical tics. And then I went to, National Institute of Health in Washington, D.C., and they have a movement disorder clinic there specifically. And so their kind of method of doing things is that all the neurologists, they get all their patients for the day or whatever, and they all go see them individually. Then they come back to the full group. They present everybody's cases. They call the patient in if, they want to, and ask them additional questions and all that kind of stuff. And then the end of the day, the doctor comes in and tells you what they decided or whatever. And so, the three kind of big diagnostic criteria, which I guess are a little different depending on exactly who you ask or what book, but basically physical tics, vocal tics, and onset before 18, right? Like you were just saying, like, youth presence. And so, at that point I was under 18 and I had the physical tics, but I didn't have the vocal tics. And I didn't really, this is told through hindsight, but at the time that, the doctor came in and was like, all right, well, we, thanks for coming. You have a tic disorder. And I remember thinking like, oh, cool. Like which one? And he was like, no, that's just it. You have a tic disorder. That's the name of it. I was like, oh man, that's anticlimactic.
I know, but
right. Thanks. Yeah. So anyway, during, I think what had happened, because they also took some video of me, and I think I'm not exactly sure why or what happened, but I think that during that time I might have had some like kind of breathing tics or coughing tics or something like that. And they had reviewed the case again and decided that like, you know what, we can count those as vocal tics. So homeboy has Tourette's. And I can't remember fully if it was if it was the day that we got that call. And if it wasn't the day, it was definitely within the week. That's when my vocal tics started.
Wow.
Like for real. Yeah. Which is crazy. And I think it has to do with that suggestible element of Tourette's, is that I didn't know I had Tourette's before. I didn't know I could have vocal tics.
Right.
And then next thing you know, I'm having vocal tics.
Yeah. That's really interesting because, there are some signs, and first off, it's interesting that they were kind of counting things as vocal tics or interpreting them as vocal tics. There are some scientists, who make the argument that all tics are motor tics. Vocal tics are just motor tics from your vocal cords. And I've heard a number of neurologists say that, and researchers say that. And it's so it's interesting that they were counting certain things or interpreting certain things as vocal tics. But it's the suggestive nature thing. Yeah, that's this is kind of like a movie. It's like after the radioactive insect bites you, and you have all these new things you do that you don't know what they are.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm gonna sneeze real quick. Oh, false alarm. I'm sorry. Continue. I guess if of all podcasts for interruptive noises, this is the one.
Yeah. Sneeze anytime you want.
Yeah. Sorry.
Like, I don't mean to say it's funny, but you know what I mean? It's
notable.
It just has this like movie quality mystery to it. And it's like, as soon as you kind of learn what it is, the sky opens up and you've got all of these symptoms. And Tourette is really curious that way. You can adopt other people's tics, and I've said it on the podcast before, it's like, it's contagious if you already have it. And
yes. Yeah.
And you pass things back and forth. If you hang out with other, Touretters, there's one tick that sometimes kind of makes its way around, like, like it's some communicable thing. And
Yeah. Well, yeah. One of my favorite kind of stories is I was a counselor at Camp Twitch and Shout for a couple
mhm.
years down in Atlanta. And yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I love telling people how you'd be at like evening campfire and you'd hear like shit, 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 and then shit, 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 shit. It's like it's real. It seems so fake. But
That's
and
funny.
also during that whole like diagnostic 5 months, the mystery, one of the weird things is like, imagine, let's say my right hand was, kind of waving back and forth. And I would tell people, it's like, well, what happens if we just hold the right hand still? And so somebody else would hold the right hand still. And then sure enough, the left hand would start doing exactly what the other one was doing. And so, I remember people
Yeah.
were like, there's no way that's real. That's like proof that you're faking it, not proof that the thing is
Right.
real. It's like,
Yeah.
actually, that's exact proof that it's Tourette's. You know what I mean? Like, that's
So,
100% in line. If you know what Tourette's does, I mean, it does that. If you don't know and you're trying to figure it out, like we were at the time, it seems bizarre.
well, to that end, just because it can be viewed as bizarre, were you, making the decision in your head as to whether you were going to try to, play it off as something else, or were you going to be open about it as Tourette? I mean,
Oh yeah, man,
it's
there was
something to kind
no
of bring your
way.
friends something like this,
It was so severe at the time that there was no way to play it off.
Right.
It's like there's only so many times you can say that there's a fly,
Right.
or whatever. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think, parents were calling the school saying like, is my kid next? Like it was a pretty big
Wow.
deal. And
They saw you as some kind of liability that would pass it on to other people or
I
something,
don't know
or?
if the school did, but the other parent, again, it was like, wow, this could have happened to anybody. Was there something in the water? Is he contagious?
Oh,
Is it, you know
okay.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
who knows? Whatever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. They're calling Aaron Brockovich to try to get down to the
yeah,
bottom of this.
yeah. In that sense. And the other thing is that, like, before I got that diagnosis, um, I'd have all these, I'd be, let's say, like, I remember standing in the lunch line at high school, next to somebody and doing these wacky wavy whatevers. And she's like, what does that mean? I was like, don't worry. It doesn't mean anything. She's like, okay, but are you trying to be funny? And, you know what I mean? And like all
Yeah.
I had at the time, I
Hmm.
didn't have any language to say anything other than just like, I don't know what I'm doing. It's weird to me. You know what I mean? Like these things that like,
Yeah.
to somebody who does, they still think that I'm messing around, but like at least having the diagnosis, having the word for it of like, oh, I have Tourette syndrome. Oh, okay, whatever. I mean, even if you don't know what it is, it at least gives it this medical name. It names it. And honestly, I mean, you were talking about that idea of like what's notable about the disorders. I tell people a lot that like Tourette's isn't, I mean, it's not, I almost said it's not real, but I mean, obviously it's real, but it's not like something that you can just like see, like, oh, obviously, look, there's the Tourette's in his brain. There it is.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Looking under the microscope, and there it
right.
is.
There's not that. It's really just a description of some bizarre things that we don't understand. And
Right.
so,
Hmm.
what does it even mean to call it Tourette's? It doesn't really mean anything other than it just gives it a name. And we just kind of like understand like, oh, that, now that we have a name for it, now we can find like connection with others that also, whose bodies also do this thing, and they can talk and have podcasts together. And
Right.
you know what I mean? That we can write that down on the education ADA form, or you know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah. And
it's
that
all
is
that.
that is an ongoing conversation of, there are some scientists who suggest, maybe we should stop calling it Tourette. And there are a couple of different angles to that, but, we're learning more about this. Should we kind of shift kind of how we frame it, how we characterize it? The tick spectrum disorder, I think, was one of the things that was suggested that we kind
Oh,
of
that's
package
interesting.
this as. And, and then I think the other angle was that the word Tourette has so much stigma around it. And I'm not really on board with that part. I kind of like the idea of reclaiming it for ourselves and, kind of using it as a
Totally.
pride point if we can.
Totally.
But yeah, I mean, that's definitely a real conversation of,
Yeah.
we put a name on this observable thing. It's, we can do brain scans. We can find, there's a lot of good research, and there's way more than I know. And the Tourette scientists might be listening, saying like, "Dude, no, there's
yeah,
we do know
cut
more
that guy's
than you're
mic."
saying."
Yeah.
But and I love all the Tourette scientists; they're amazing.
Of course.
But yeah, it is, for the most part, when it comes to going to the neurologist to get a diagnosis, it's based on observation of kind of what you're doing, what you got, what the rhythm of it is. When the onset was, do you have vocal tics and motor tics, or then you have the other people saying, well, it's all kind of the same thing anyway. And so yeah, it's definitely like nothing's really planted in the ground necessarily with it. Hey guys, we'll get back to the conversation in just a minute, but real quick, I want to invite you guys to a big event I'll be emceeing on October 29th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can sit wherever you want, you can wear whatever you want. It's the virtual gala with the Tourette Association of America. They asked me to MC this, and I'm pumped. It's a big fundraiser for the Tourette Association so they can continue their work for the community. Science, research, awareness, education, sponsoring Tourette's podcast, all kinds of resources that are freely available to you that can make a big difference in your life. I'll be joined by a number of special guests, including the Mazzarisi brothers, Caden and Jace, young men I got to talk to over Zoom just recently, and they told me how having Tourette actually makes them popular at school. For real, that's what they said, because it's a rare thing to have, but still, millions and millions of people have it, so they've got a posse. Caden and Jace are on deck to open up the gala. And by the way, they're also spokesmen for Tourette's podcast. Do you guys want to tell everybody to listen to Tourette's podcast so they understand what you go through and so they understand more about Tourette syndrome? You could tell all your friends right now to listen to Tourette's podcast.
Go look at Tourette's podcast to see our life. Yeah. So make sure to do that, and we will see you back at the 2020 Virtual Gala.
The Virtual Gala, October 29th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tourette.org/gala. Okay, back to the conversation.
I knew somebody, and I want to be conscious of telling another person's story, but I knew somebody who actually also happened to go to high school and had tics that developed around the same time that I did, at the same age. However, her tics were this one very specific vocal tic, and it was just this like loud yell. And I was the one that was kind of publicly like Tourette guy, whatever. And I think because hers was so specific that it wasn't like nobody made the connection at the time until we kind of reconnected a lot later, and she did one, and I was like, "Oh, you have Tourette's too?" And it became this whole thing of like, at first she had never used the word Tourette's to describe it, but then once we kind of talked about, and she was hesitant to do so, she didn't have physical tics, but once I kind of talked to her about like what my experience was with Tourette's, and like talked about using the name Tourette's and all that kind of stuff, and that like even though she didn't have physical tics, like who cares? Really, at least for her situation, and she was able to start using that word, then just the word alone, I mean, able to use it like internally, having a name for it was huge in the way that she was able to then talk about it. It was like, why did you make that noise? Oh, well, I have this or that. End of story.
Yeah. Your ability to, I guess, know yourself, know your history, then have this thing kind of come on. I feel like it does kind of play, just from my sort of outside view, I feel like it does kind of play into kind of where you are professionally, or at least your ability to be really excellent at it, just because you know that there are things out there that not everybody understands. And, and you yourself are still trying to work out, like, okay, so what's this, what does this part of it mean? And, and I'm still doing that with myself. I was diagnosed when I was like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
But having that and being able to kind of open yourself and make yourself vulnerable to other people makes it easier for other people to talk to you. And, that's what I found after I opened up about my own TS, which I hid, my whole life because I was embarrassed by it. People have just kind of opened up to me because I think I showed that vulnerability, and they're like, okay, so this guy might get it. And there are coworkers who've kind of opened up to me as well about, health things or personal life things that were definitely not brought to me before because I was just a guy at that point.
Yeah, just a guy.
Yeah, and it's like I'm not saying I'm like more than that now, but the doors are more open. Sure. I guess in
from other people's minds, you're not just a guy; you're the guy with Tourette's.
Right. Yeah. Or the guy who this guy has something that people misunderstood about him, and maybe I misunderstood too. Maybe I can talk to him, and that's that's been really nice because I felt like in the past maybe 3 years, even outside of this podcast, I've had more human conversations with people than I ever have in my whole life, versus being kind of locked up about it, and being obviously personally shameful, but just kind of opening that up. People see that invite, and it's nice. I feel like I don't have these sort of small talk conversations. I still do. I mean, that's still the break room thing that happens at work, but the small talk stuff is less and less, and I feel like the meaningful stuff is more and more. And I completely trace that to, if not Tourette specifically, just the fact that I started feeling okay talking about it and making that vulnerability known.
Yeah.
And I feel like you might be, and again, I don't know, but it just seems like I could see people being really comfortable around you in your profession, talking to you about really personal things, and having faith in you that you're going to get it, or at least be open-minded enough to hear what, maybe you're trying to work out with them. That seems really powerful to me.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. And I think you're right. Just because I think mine is, I'm not going to say severe. It's strong enough that it's not reliably hideable. And because I am talking to students about difficult things, and I don't want them to think that I'm like making faces at them or reacting to them or judging something that they're saying. And also, working in an office environment, there's a lot of people around that you might not necessarily be in a space to have a conversation with, or like a personal conversation, but should probably know why that guy is yelling in the other office. So I have these 2 signs that I have, and part of my strategy was asking somebody else in the office, asking that we have like kind of a marketing person in the office. And so I asked her to help me make these signs. That was kind of my way of forcing an ally in the office before actually knowing anybody. So we made up these signs that just say like, I have Tourette syndrome, and this is what it is. And it doesn't mean anything about the conversation that I'm having. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask.
Yeah.
And one of them is kind of framed on the side table next to me, so that if if the student is sitting in my office talking to me, they can see it, and it's right next to me. Yeah. And then another one is, I have like an internal window in my office that faces the hallway. And so another one is put in the window there. And that one is for the coworkers that walk by, whether I'm there or not. And they say, oh, that's that guy, and, as far as opening conversations, when I first put those up, I did have a lot of, sorry, my cat has entered the chat. A lot of coworkers who did come up and say things like, and to bless them, there were some that were like, you're so brave, and I know that that's kind of like rude to say it that way, but I don't know what else to say. And some level of that.
Definitely familiar with that too. Yeah.
Right. It's like, well, hey, I can appreciate the acknowledgement. And so that's been wonderful. And also now that I've worked there, what I find is that if I've been in a group long enough, then whenever there is like a new person that comes in, my coworkers or the other people, they'll tell them that, they'll figure it out anyway. But yeah, entering a completely new space full of new people is always the challenging one for me. And as far as students, I haven't had a whole lot of conversations about it, or students haven't brought it up. I know that they see it, and I'm sure that there is kind of an element of what you're talking about. But I had one student who came in once, and I saw her like look at the sign and kind of smile a little bit, and she goes, is Tourette syndrome a disability? I was like, that's an interestingly formal way to say that. And and I just said like, well, technically, yes. And, here's why, and here's how it affects me. And she's like, I also have a disability. I was like, oh, tell me more. Well, it turns out that within the last week or two, she had been diagnosed with a learning disability and was starting to kind of learn her identity around the word disability itself. And so that's why she had asked me that question in that way.
Okay.
And we got to be, I kind of got to be a little disability mentor for her, kind of a situation in that moment. And that was a cool feeling. And I mean, I think that speaks to what you were saying about how being open about it can open doors,
Yeah. And kind of going back to what we were saying early on in this conversation too, of just the power of just listening and having that conversation can just kind of take the pressure off and just kind of make that environment easier to, you don't have to have your mind constantly on like, oh, what's this person thinking? The context is set. I don't expect anybody to talk about anything they don't want to talk about, especially if it's, like it's very personal. There's medicine involved and all that. I mean, only say what you want to say, but
sure, of course.
But the general sort of theme that I like about people just kind of opening up about this stuff is it makes it okay for other people to feel, I'll say it makes it more comfortable for people to open up in similar ways.
Yeah.
Before, where you might have not seen the numbers, you might feel kind of self-ostracized. I've heard people say, like, I don't talk about my problems because I don't want to look like a burden, or I don't want to seem like the freak in the room that everybody has to feel sorry for. But if it's something that's just kind of more there and people are talking about it and there are characters in TV shows, and that's a sensitive one because you have to be careful with that.
Yeah, you have to do it right.
Yeah. But if the representation is there, then the representation is there, and it's easier for people who don't have the, Tourette's a disability, but I may not understand the dynamics of other disabilities, but I'm at least more comfortable in that context talking with other people who do have other kinds of disabilities, and we can have a conversation, not even about that, just about whatever, Nintendo games, baseball cards, like whatever it is, because we've already kind of like put that to rest. We've got our things, and you get it. You're going to be cool about it. I get it. I'll be cool about it, and we can just kind of hang out and talk. And which is the cool thing about like Camp Twitch and Shout, where it's off the table. It's not like, does that guy over there have Tourette? It's
right. It's like obviously
right. And you can just kind of hang out and be kids and be yourself and have fun and talk about other things that you want to talk about, instead of just being like the Tourette's guy all the time.
Yeah. Like you and I probably have a whole lot in common, and our entry point is Tourette's.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be Tourette all the time, and I hope that Camp Twitch and Shout, like there's a healthy amount of discussion, finding your commonalities, and like, like when were you diagnosed, and you learn each other's stories because, Tourette is obviously a big part. But then, just kind of get to whatever else you're interested in, because there's more to you than just that.
Totally. I remember one of the things that, at least at the time, I think I'm remembering this right. Forgive me if not. But one of the things that I do remember is that like they specifically don't have like sessions where we're going to have Tourette session now. We're going to have a facilitated conversation, right? They let the kids have those conversations on their own. And one of the things that I remember from it too is that a lot of the kids either sometimes they didn't even know, like their parents didn't just... I guess they had never said, hey, by the way, this is a Tourette's camp that you're going to. They just let them go, or that, they didn't understand or whatever. But there were more than once, somebody gave their speech, of that, like, the first day in the dining hall.
Yeah,
guys, I have Tourette syndrome. And it's like, man, let me stop you right there. We all do, you don't have to, you don't have to do the thing. We've all done the thing.
So, Jollyville Radio.
Yeah.
So how did that, because I know the focus, so it's mostly fictional, you were saying, but the focus is kind of on good, positive, upbeat kind of stories.
Yeah. Good vibes, community building.
How did all that come to be?
Yeah.
Did it have to do with the kind of work you do communicating with people and kind of building community and building the feeling of it being okay? Or
yeah, so it's a real roundabout story. So the other thing that we haven't really brought up yet is that I'm a musician, and I love music, and I always have, and one of my favorite parts of it has been arranging music, and specifically for marching band. So in high school and most of college, my hobby was to just tack away at a computer, taking whatever song was popular on the radio or whatever me and my friends were listening to, and then kind of arranging that in such a way that a marching band could play that. And as you can imagine, it's not super easy just to find an entire marching band willing to try out your music. And so at some point I had kind of decided to make that a brass quintet, and that, since it's all hobby and theoretical anyway, I would just pick a particular ensemble, and then maybe one day that ensemble would exist. And so I decided on brass quintet, and that was just kind of my hobby, was imagining this brass quintet. I'm a percussionist myself. I don't even play a brass instrument, but and so that kind of built this dream of one day I'm going to have a brass quintet, and I'm not even going to play in it. I might do drums sometimes, but I'm going to be the arranger. And so anyway, so several years kind of had that in the back of my mind. And then when I moved to Austin, it's a city of live music, right? And if I'm ever going to do it, I better do it now. And so I made this brass quintet, and it was Jollyville Brass Quintet. And like I said, Jollyville comes from an actual part of Austin. It used to be its own town a long time ago, but got swallowed up and is mostly forgotten. I think there's like an elementary school and a fire department and a couple other things with that name on it. But it's a great name, right? Jollyville.
Yeah.
And so that was, so it was Jollyville Brass Quintet, and we did a few things, and we were trying to, this isn't like the party New Orleans kind of band. This is like, we wear black and bring our music stands kind of a band. And so trying to find exactly how we fit in was a little tough until we started doing the storytelling. And so we'd play some music, and then one time we did a whole murder mystery show. We had characters, and we did lines, and we had the audience have to figure out who killed whatever. And then another time we did this Christmas radio special where we kind of, in between playing, we pretended that we were in the studio giving this, radio drama of like an elf or whatever. And so though we got a lot of good responses from that, and so we had decided to take Jollyville Brass into this direction of, brass, but we're also doing a radio show in between the music.
That's so
cool. Cut to March 2020, coronavirus happened, and it's no longer a good idea to blow air and spit into metal tubes in close vicinity of other people. So we kind of cut the brass quintet part of it for the time being. And after some of the dust settled again, it was like, man, we miss each other. We liked hanging out. We liked having a project to work on. What can we do? And so I came up with this Jollyville radio idea. And so I'd say it's about half of the people from the brass quintet plus just a bunch of people from other places in life that so we have maybe like a dozen or so people involved in different ways. And and so excuse me, what we do is we kind of go back to that radio drama style of just telling stories, and we try to keep it fun and uplifting. We try to keep it at 20 minutes or less. And so usually the first part of the podcast is, stories or skits or whatever. We make it sound like it's a real radio station. So it's usually like we have one called History Chats where we get we had Benjamin Franklin, and we have a call-in show for Benjamin Franklin. And the kind of the joke is that everybody who's calling in gets it wrong. Like, what was it like to be president? Oh, well, I wasn't a president. What's it like to have wooden teeth? Oh, well, that wasn't me. like that kind of thing. And so anyway, so funny, goofy stuff. And then kind of going back to that idea of like everyone's feeling isolated, I need to focus on what beautiful community things are happening. Every episode we close with an interview, with a nonfiction interview of a real person and who's doing some kind of community building work. And so we've talked to a nature preschool teacher. We've talked to who's in New York City. We've talked to a doula and birth worker in Atlanta, Georgia. We've talked to a political activist in Los Angeles. We've talked to a student activities director in Hawaii. And those are the ones with all the cool, interesting places. And we've also talked to a whole bunch of people in Austin, as you can imagine, just because it's kind of easier access. And so, by doing this, by building this kind of fake community that everyone can, I'm making air quotes right now, live in, we live in Jollyville. Like, even though some of us live in Austin, some of us live in Michigan, some live in North Carolina, we can build this community together and then also share it with our friends and our family and hopefully a bigger, broader audience too. And honestly, I mean, from a totally self-serving standpoint, we have a big Halloween release. We've been collaborating with a horror podcast. There's a podcast a friend of mine does from New York City. It's called the Lunatics Radio Hour. And a couple of weeks ago, they do horror. So all things, monsters and creepy crawly and like all this and that. And I did an episode with them a couple of weeks ago about Tourette syndrome and how that plays into the history of possession.
Yeah.
And like, demonic possession stories. And we talked specifically about the movie The Exorcist and how I honestly saw some similarities to my own medical experience to that character in that story and just stuff like that. So anyway, they're really interesting podcast to begin with. You can also hear a Tourette's episode featuring yours truly with them. But point is, we kind of took their knowledge of horror and drama and all that, and then our expertise of making radio plays and put together this scary monster story that takes place in a radio station. That's coming out on Halloween. At least the idea that's salient to me right now is the idea that Tourette's is both a real thing and also just kind of a name that we give this thing. And I imagine that you have a lot of listeners at different kind of points in life or different stages or even different geographical areas. And as an adult, whatever I can do to let them know that it gets better. And that there are people out there who suck and may, make jokes or make judgments or make fun of it. But, if you find the right people, which is not hard, then, people are respectful, people are understanding. And especially once they have kind of a name for it and kind of have at least a general idea of what's going on, then people can be really helpful and wonderful and supportive.
Thanks for listening. Thanks so much to Michael for telling his story. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was funny, relatable, and definitely different. And I do recommend his podcast, Jollyville Radio. You can find it on all the podcast apps. I got to finish packing and heading out the door. And don't forget, Tourette.org/gala. Please check that out and keep your eyes on the social media channels for updates on tickets for the virtual gala, October 29th, 7 p.m. EST. And we'll catch back up next week. Thanks again. This is Ben.